we have become very much a nation of bullies. And Donald Trump is the quintessence. I mean, he is the bully of bullies, but I think in many respects, he's the consequence, the culmination of 40 or 50 years of allowing bullying, economic bullying and other forms of bullying in this country to get out of control.
You have all these people who've come to feel this anti-establishment fury. Give us your vision of how an economic populist message from the left could channel this fury at the rigged system, or is it impossible to do so?
Well, it's difficult, but it's not impossible. I think that instead of looking at cultural culprits like the Republicans do, like Donald Trump does, immigrants and the deep state and transgender people and so on. What you want to do is really talk about the real sources of economic bullying. And those are big corporations. They're monopolistic. They're using their political power to get changes in laws that hurt many, many people, wealthy people who are also getting changes in laws and rules and regulations and lowering their taxes in ways that ultimately hurt everybody else because there's not enough money in the system to finance what we need done. I mean, you don't have to go far to see the sources of bullying in our society. Now, I'm not saying everybody who's rich or every large corporation is to blame, but the abuses of their power, their economic power, those abuses are to blame. And I think that we have to stand up to them. Now, occasionally there are Democrats like Bernie Sanders and AOC, and I expect Mamdani and others who are standing up. But as a strategy, the Democratic Party used to stand up to that kind of bullying, but is not doing it any longer.
So you say that you watch Democrats abandon the working class, and they started abandoning the working class and labor movement over half a century ago. Walk us through the timeline of how the party left behind its working class roots and why it chose to prioritize college-educated voters over working class ones. And was it the only choice, or one or the other, or could they have done it?
Well, it's certainly not the only choice. They could have done something different. I mean, they abandoned the working class, not just the white working class, but the working class in America. And they did it. I was there. To some extent, I allowed it to happen. I didn't fight as hard as I should have fought. But even in the Clinton administration, and Kara, make no mistake, I'm proud to have been part of the Clinton administration. I think we did some important things like the Family and Medical Leave Act and expanding something that makes people's eyes glaze over, even to this day, which is the Earned Income Tax Credit. I mean, there are a lot of very important policies. But the problem was that administration really didn't understand that deregulating finance and allowing global trade to dominate the way it did, and taking our eyes off monopolization, and not really encouraging unionization as much as we should have. I mean, all of these ways contributed to disempowering millions of people in this country, and ultimately helped lead to Donald Trump.
So why do that? Why prioritize college-educated voters over that?
Well, I think that there was a mythology in the Democratic Party that the swing vote, the suburban swing voters, really made all the difference. And Kara, I can't tell you how many conversations I had with Democratic operatives, political operatives, who said, we don't want to go back to the old Democrats, Democrats, who worried about the poor and the working class and had this notion of class in their minds. No, we really want to do something that is very different. And I saw this begin in the 1980s with the so-called Atari Democrats. Remember the Atari Democrats?
Yes, indeed.
They asked me to help, and I would, Gary Hart, who I think had some very important and good ideas. And Walter Mondale, who was not exactly an Atari Democrat, Bill Clinton, but they thought about where the economy was heading, which is appropriate. But they didn't think about bringing everybody along to where the economy was heading.
You also wrote about the abandonment. It goes back even further to the Port Huron statement in 1962, that idea that class politics were passé.
Yes, and I am guilty of that. I read the Port Huron statement, and I thought, oh, this is really exactly right. And I read John Kenneth Galbraith, one of my heroes, my intellectual heroes, and Betty Friedan, all of the people who formed the intellectual basis for the so-called New Left. But what we left out was the working class.
Right.
There used to be a labor movement. Well, by the 1960s, 70s, there was not any longer a labor movement as such. There was organized labor as an interest group. There was the women's movement. There was the movement toward equal marriage rights and gays.
Civil
There was a
rights,
movement, there were a lot of the environmental movement. There were a lot of movements, but there wasn't the worker movement. We forgot about workers.
So talk about the psychology of working class voters. And you explained that Americans who have fallen behind their own economic expectations were drawn to Trump. You also quote a former Democratic congressperson who said many working class men have been humiliated, as you noted, and emasculated by the economy that doesn't value their work. Talk about that role and that pride, status, and respect play.
It's not just economics, obviously. But you see, if you lose your economic base, if you lose your job, or if you lose a good job, a unionized job, the chances are you are also going to feel that your pride, your place, your status, your role in the economy and in your community and in the world has altered, has been degraded. You are going to feel looked down upon. And I saw that. When I was labor secretary, I'd go out to the country and I'd talk to people, and people who were losing their jobs, good factory jobs, good unionized jobs. Now, let me just make sure we're all together on this, because bringing back manufacturing is itself not the answer, because if it's not unionized, it's not going to be good jobs. The key in the 1950s and 60s and 70s was that these were unionized jobs, so that, you had a third of the private sector workforce in unions. That gave them strength, solidarity, gave them strength. And if there's another theme that's quite central to this book, it's that we can't take on the bullies unless we are together, unless we are organized and mobilized. We who are not bullies, we who want to take on the bullies, there has to be countervailing power. And that is critically important in terms of doing anything in this country.
So you were labor secretary during the Clinton administration, as you noted, and then economic advisor to President Obama. In both cases, Larry Summers emerged as your foil, although you loved getting lunch with him when you were both at Harvard. You write that he played a role in convincing Clinton to join NAFTA and to avoid regulating financial derivatives, which helped lead the 2008 financial crisis. After the crisis, he helped persuade Obama to bail out banks instead of homeowners. Why did they both side with Summers and other advisors who favored Wall Street interests? And why didn't they have the political will to fight for everyday Americans who you champion?
I can't speak for what was in Larry Summers' head, but I can say that Wall Street was becoming more and more powerful. And powerful economically, powerful politically. Bob Rubin, who is a very important character in this story, and he persuaded Clinton, I think, in part because, the financial sector of the economy was so critical. It could bring down Clinton. Clinton knew that. Obama knew that. And they, in a sense, were being manipulated. That's maybe too strong a word, but I think looking historically back on what happened, it is accurate, being manipulated by the titans of Wall Street. Why did we get a bailout of the financial sector? Well, maybe you could argue that had they allowed big banks to go down, the whole economy would have gone down with them. But there's also something called bankruptcy. Maybe we could have allowed some of the big banks to go into some sort of reorganization of their debts. Maybe we could have helped the homeowners instead of helping the banks. A lot could have been done. And this is, the book is bipartisan in the sense, Kara, that it's not about just the Republicans' failure. It's about Democrats' failure as well.
But what caused them to not side with you, for example, from your perspective?
I mean, number one, maybe I wasn't persuasive enough. I grant that in the book. I mean, it's a confessional in terms of my inability to sway the people I wanted to sway. But it's also, again, I want to emphasize, Alan Greenspan, who was Fed chair, and the financial markets had huge power, and they continue to have huge power. They can bring down an administration. It was very clear. I mean, look what happened to Jimmy Carter. Look what happened to George H.W. Bush. They were brought down. They became one-term presidents because finance turned on them. Because the Fed turned on them and the financial community turned on them.
So how do you fight that if you're a Democrat?
It's power that is allocated in a way that is bad for average working people and bad for most people. And what you want to do is build countervailing power. And a part of building countervailing power is controlling finance, regulating finance, making sure that finance doesn't get out of control. This is a kind of repeat of what we went through after 1933, certainly after the Great Depression, after the crash of 1929. We learned these lessons, Kara, and we forgot them. We learned them as Democrats, and we forgot them.